Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre and I'm your bookworm. And today we have another book review. We are continuing or finishing one of the series that we started here on the channel. The series that is the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, and the book itself is Speaking Bones. For the ones that don't know Ken Liu, I have read and reviewed 4 of his books so far here on the channel. This is the 5th book. I mean, 3 of those reviews are for the same series as this book. The other one is for a short story compilation. So you can check out all of those here on the channel. Either through the thumbnails or the cards up above. You know the drill, just follow through, you'll get to it. You'll have the same standard of reviews here. But if you're here for this book in specific, well, Speaking Bones is the 4th and last book of the Dandelion Dynasty. It was initially published in 2022. This is an epic fantasy with a heavy Asian inspiration story. It is spanning many years, so you get a full epicness in this volume. But I mean, I can get to that in the proper review. Regarding the details of this book was not nominated for any awards. I think, at least from what I could see, I didn't find anything, which I was very surprised, and I'll get to why in the review. But let me just say that I think this book was quite underhyped, because on Goodreads it only has over 4,000 ratings, which again, I thought it was very little compared to how good I think this book is. But the score at least matches a bit my expectation, because it has a score of 4.53 out of 5, which is quite high. We know that in fantasy, on Goodreads, they can be quite inflated, being a 4 to 4.2 usually, but anything above that is considered quite good, even within fantasy. So 4.53 bodes well, and as you'll see, I think my opinion goes along with this score as well. Before we jump into our review, let's just go through our housekeeping items. The first of them being the synopsis. I'm going to narrate the synopsis for you. If you don't want to hear anything about it because you're allergic to spoilers, or simply because you already know what this book is about, you can skip to the next timestamp, which is in that side. You'll get directed towards the first category of this review, which is plot. Otherwise, you can stick around, hear me talk about it, and then we'll go through the scores for the previous books. Today is a day of it's hard to speak. Ukyu Gunde. Stalked by foes and dogged by betrayal, Princess Thera is pursued across a continent vaster than she could ever have imagined, to the hidden valleys of the World's Edge Mountain, into the barrows and subterranean halls of the City of Ghosts, across the icy flows of the far north. She breached the Wall of Storms, intent on taking war to the Ryukyu homelands. But how do you conquer the unconquerable? Dara. Empress Jia, Princess Firo, and Pekyu Tanganaki find themselves bound to paths they never would have chosen. Amid atrocity and subterfuge, they will discover that the courage of brutes is no substitute for the grace of kings, and that little separates the grace of kings from the madness of tyrants. On both sides of the Wall of Storms, defeat's bitter tears mix with the fruits of knowledge, new and ancient, as two empires bound by blood and bone, by wit and iron, by time and custom, face a whirlwind that threatens to utterly consume them. The teeth, as they say, are on the board. All right, with our synopsis out of the way, which by the way is really good synopsis, I think it just encompasses the whole book very well, or at least the premise of the book, and that final sentence, which is so characteristic of this book and it means so much. I think it's just chef's kiss for the synopsis. But anyways, let's get on to the scores for the previous books. I'm just going to show them here so that you can have a sense of how the scores or how the books performed across the series. And as you can see, the first one wasn't the best. It got a 4 out of 5. Then we got a really good jump going to 4.6, and the third one went down quite a bit again to a 4. Now, the reason why the first and third book got 4s are different. The first one, I thought the writing style was quite harsh, in the sense we were having hippo dumps a lot. We had so many names to memorize to understand what they were, and that really detracted from the story. Whereas the third one, it suffered a bit on the plot. I think it was overextended. We took some detours that we didn't really need to take, so there were some stylistic choices that weren't the best in regards to plot. But one of the things that this series overall does well, characters. As you can see, characters always had a great score, and I think they just keeps getting better. I mean, you're gonna see in the review, which will jump right after, but as you can see so far, the scores have been a bit yo-yoing across the board. So let's see what this final book brings us. Okay, so our first category is plot, and what do we have to say about plot? It was pretty much as I expected, in the sense that we start the book and we progress this book simply by initiating the war that we had built up in the third book. I mean, it's not exactly the start of the war, but we have the continuation of the plans that were set in motion from the third to the fourth book, and then we have the development of that war. Even though that war didn't exactly go as I expected, I thought there were a lot of twists in the good way. They left me really surprised throughout the book, not only in terms of battles, but in terms of what characters would do, and in terms of the world itself, how the world was changing in terms of how the war was going as well. So if you're going to read this book, expect a lot of the plot to be about the effects of war and how it causes a lot of the story to change in itself. Not really about the heroes going into the war, defeating the bad guys whatsoever, and then coming out victorious. It's more about how a war changes characters, how war changes the world, how war changes the story that people tell. And I think a lot of these themes were also explored in terms of the writing style, which I will get to it. And what I can say is that the plot had a lot of war in it. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't just battles after battles. Actually, there weren't that many battles for the dimension of this war. But I think those battles were not only extended to a really good point, I don't think they were too long or too short, but the events that happened in those battles were just mind-blowing. I thought they caused so many things to get put into motion or just trigger developments in characters or twists in plot. So I think all of them were super important, super vital, and everything just aligned really well. So I think the story couldn't have ended in a better way even if I asked. Not only were all the plot points tied up perfectly, and when I mean perfectly, it doesn't mean that they ended well, but that they ended in a way that is coherent with the story, with the characters, and that I could totally see that happening. So I'm going to give this category a 5 out of 5. Even though it is a big jump going from a 3 in the previous book to a 5 in this book, I think it is so well deserved because not only did we have the culmination of all the expectation that had built up in the third to the fourth book, but I also think Ken Liu was able to wrap up the plot, the stories, the characters, everything so neatly in this package that made the book, the whole series, worth reading. Of course, I still think that the third book should have benefited from some edits in some of the arcs, and I don't think it should have been extended as much as it was, but I understand a bit better why the situation was like that for the third book. I would still change it, but I understand it more. And so for this book, I think the 5 out of 5 for plot is deserved. All right, let's talk about characters because this book has, I think, some of the best characters I've ever read in fantasy. Not because the characters themselves are memorable, but just simply because of their development. I think the arcs of most of these characters are super memorable. They go through so many struggles, strifes, and you really, really feel it within them. And it kind of makes you think, what would I do if I were in their place? So you feel this connection with them that you don't usually feel that deeply with characters in other books. I think Empress Gia was my favorite character since probably book 2. In book 1, I didn't pay much attention to her. I saw her, but she didn't really capture me. But from book 2 onwards, I think I was really, really grabbed by her. Every time she was on screen, I was always really paying a lot of attention to her. And this fourth book, it was just so good to see her struggles and knowing what she was going through, still like seeing her struggle and just imagining what would happen afterwards. Once her plans were done, how would she deal with the world, or and how would she deal with herself, which was such an important question to explore in this book. So I really loved her development. And just because I'm talking about Empress Gia doesn't mean that all the other characters were bad. No, so many of these characters had amazing developments with a lot of different questions that they themselves had to answer that in reverse made us ask, what would I do in their case? And I think that is only possible because all the characters feel quite deep, they feel quite real in the sense that they all have aspirations, fears, dreams, struggles, like I keep saying, and therefore they connect with us. And that is really good because if you connect with the characters, then you know that's a point of tension because whenever that character is in danger or whenever that character is struggling with some issue, you feel the same thing, and that's what makes you read more. So I think the way Ken Liu just created these characters was really good. It developed really well as the books progressed, and I wasn't really expecting by the end for me to love these characters as much as I did. And I mean, the way the arcs of these characters went, I was not expecting for most of them. Some of them left me jaw agape. I was very surprised, but none of them felt incoherent with the story, and a lot of them made sure that the characters didn't achieve what they wanted, but still allow them to grow and learn and change directions towards another part of the plot, which is really important, so it doesn't become predictable. And I think in the end, the way Ken Liu was able to tie all of these characters together and just give them all their endings, not necessarily happy, not necessarily sad, but just their endings was really good, and that is one of the reasons why I'm going to give this category a 5 out of 5. World building is our next category, and what can we say about the world in this last volume? I think Ken Liu was able again to develop this world, deepen it, make it slightly more complex, while still being coherent with the previous three books and not discounting the attention of the reader. And I could separate this category into, for example, history, into the culture, into the world itself, but I think Ken Liu just excelled in all of them. For example, the gods. Gods were these things from the world that were quite present in the first book. They were always kind of tinkering along with humans' fates, and as the series progressed, they started going more and more to the foreground. At the same time, technology, weapons, everything, as it started being developed and evolved, we started seeing them becoming more and more to the foreground. So there's this interplay of the magic versus technology going one towards the back and one towards the front as we progress through the story. And I think that was done very subtly, very well done. And on top of this, we also have the history of the world, which both continents that just keeps getting deeper, as well as the culture, which I think was one of the best things, since Ken Liu uses a lot these aspects of the world to talk about the themes that he wants to explore, which again, I'll talk about in writing style. But I would say that the culture in the two continents, the way they clash, the way they integrated sometimes, was done very well without just erasing some aspects of it. I think they were all very well addressed. So for this category, I am also giving a 5 out of 5. I think everything was described to the level of depth that I wanted, and also to the vastness of it, considering that this seemed to be quite a vast world. It felt like it, but it didn't feel empty. There were several areas of things always happening, several regions. There were civilizations, but there was also history of past civilizations. So all of these things interconnecting with each other to create a real or almost real world. Next on our list and second last category is writing style, which is also the last of the technical categories. And what do I have to say about this category? I mean, I think one of the things you can perfectly see is how Ken Liu's writing improves book after book after book. The first book, super intense with the amount of names, info dumps, so much description of the world, it is quite hard to get through. Second book, it gets a lot better, the characters get fleshed out a lot better. Third book, even more. There is a sense of him taking some artistic liberties in the third book, in the sense of exploring ways that the plot could go, that I personally didn't agree with. But at the same time, I think an author should do that. The author is supposed to experiment and expand the way he or she does things, and sometimes it will work and it will come out as a perfect book. Other times it might not work, and that's when the author should realize and be like, okay, let me go back to where I was, continue like this, because this is, I know it works perfectly well for this story. And so for me, that third book was a bit of a deviation, didn't really work, but his fourth book went back in line and just blasted through in terms of all the categories, and I think he excelled at that. I mean, not only was the prose fluid, it was so nice to read. I didn't ever feel tired from descriptions, or at the same time didn't feel like it was too simple. It was just that perfect medium. And that was great because it allowed me to read for continuous periods of time, and I never felt tired. I never felt exhausted from just not understanding things or just having a lot of information dumped into me. Felt like everything was always going almost like a movie in my head. And at the same time, that is also part of the pacing, because the pacing was done perfectly. There were those peaks and valleys that I keep mentioning, where of course the peaks when it's fast is those battles that are always happening, a lot of action. And the valleys were just as interesting because we had so much of the character development, of the world building itself, without being info dumpy. It was just adding information that would be relevant for battles, and therefore you knew that everything was going to ramp up soon, and whenever it slowed down, you knew that the characters would have to develop from the aftermath of those battles. So everything was really well integrated and making the pacing really good. And of course, I need to talk about the themes in this book, because I think Ken Liu explored such amazing themes and explored them without looking or sounding the minimum sermon-y as they can. Like, it was just amazing how themes like culture appropriation, culture assimilation, culture erasure, racism, the good of the community versus the good of one, all of these questions were analyzed in this book in ways that were just great. I saw the characters struggling with this. I saw the world having to suffer the consequences of two cultures clashing together. And so I think Ken Liu just created this perfect storm that allowed us to see those lightnings of brilliance in terms of themes for this book. And I think it's great because a lot of them I probably wouldn't think so much about it, or simply because I am not exposed or I don't have the experience with it. But this way, I was able to actually see it and realize how this happens in our world and how I might have been oblivious to it, or sometimes I am aware, but a better way to deal with it. And I think that is just great when a book is able to teach you those things that you might even, you don't know that you didn't know. So that's, again, I've mentioned this before with, for example, Equal Rights. Is just books that explore themes in such a way that really makes you stop and think about it, and I think that is really good. So this is a category that if I could, I would give more than 5, but since I can't, I think this category is going to be a 5 out of 5. And finally, our last category is enjoyment, and if you've reached this far, you can probably guess what I'm going to give to enjoyment, because I mean, I've been gushing about this book for this review nonstop. I think this book was excellent in all of the technical categories, and I think it was just, there's not much I can actually pick and criticize, except if it were like just small details that I don't think detract from the story overall. And I mean, my enjoyment going into this book was already quite high. It wasn't at its peak because I read the previous book, I was a bit hesitant the way it was so extended, but I was excited because it was the last one and I knew a big war was coming. And as I kept progressing throughout the book, my excitement never went down. Even in the parts that seemed less fast, the slow-paced parts were still super interesting, especially because of the characters, the way they were being developed. I mean, Empress Gia, like I said, is one of my favorite characters in fantasy overall, simply because of the struggles that she goes through. I think she was done so well. I really loved her. So my excitement was always at a high, because whenever I wasn't getting action or new technologies being developed, I was getting good characters being developed, and that's always something good going on. And I mean, the plot twists were also really good. Whenever there was a battle, I knew that something was going to happen. I had no idea what exactly, but I knew that by the end, I was going to be surprised. And I was always right. I was always surprised by the end of each one of the battles, because they always took turns that I was not expecting. And Ken Liu was really good at doing that. And I mean, especially the last battle, when it ends and you still have like 200 pages left of the book, and not everything ended in a happy ending. So you're like, uh-oh, what's going to happen next? How are we going to go through 200 pages? And we did. We just go through the aftermath of war, which is kind of just as important as the war itself, because you want to know what resulted after this huge event in the history of the two continents. So my enjoyment, of course, is going to be a 5 out of 5. It couldn't be any higher than this. Any lower, I mean. And that kind of ends our review. So just as a refresher, we have 5 for plot, characters, world building, writing style, and enjoyment, which gives us a perfect score of 5 out of 5. I haven't had one like this in a while, so it was really good to get this score. I really love this book. It surprised me because I was not expecting to love it this much, and I wasn't expecting to just have such a deep connection with the characters. So I would totally recommend. I mean, I know that the series is a bit tough because the first book, it is a lot to get through, but once you get through that first book, I bet you're going to enjoy the second one a lot more. And believe me, even though the third one is slightly worse, I think the fourth and final book is totally worth the adventure. And I know the series does a bit of yo-yoing, might be because I'm a bit harsher. Maybe for you, won't yo-yo that much and it will stabilize a bit more, but for that, you actually need to read it. But I mean, if I haven't convinced about the themes, Empress Gia and how amazing she was, or just the world that is so rich and so cool, then I don't know what will convince you. Maybe the Goodreads score, it has a 4.53. I know I'd give it a higher score, but I think 4.53 is quite adequate for the book. It could have been higher, of course, but I mean, really good score. So let me know, do you know any other stories like this? Small series, I mean, small, 4 books, and each book is quite chunky, but you know what I mean. If you know, comment down below. Otherwise, if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and you shall be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays. See you soon.